Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be talking about proof of work and proof of stake in the crypto industry. Why were they created? Why are they different? Um, what are a few of their similarities? And what are the goals of each of these two very popular blockchain consensus mechanisms? So, without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and thank you for joining me on this presentation. All right, here we are. Proof of work and proof of stake, models of blockchain consensus. So, for starters, what is proof of work and what is proof of stake? Proof of work and proof of stake are two blockchain consensus models that are used to ensure the validity of transactions in cryptocurrency trading. Proof of work involves solving complex cryptographic mathematical equations using computing power. In contrast, in proof of stake models, stakers put up digital coins for the right to validate new block transactions on chain. With the proof of work model, or PoW, cryptocurrency miners compete against each other to solve complex problems using high powered computers. Those first to do so are given the authority to add the new block of transactions and then rewarded with digital currency for their work. When a block is authenticated, it's added to the blockchain. Proof of work requires increasingly fast computers, the use of significant energy resources, and processes that eventually slow down transaction times as the cryptocurrency network grows. With the proof of stake PoS model, miners have to pledge a stake of digital currency before they can validate transactions. A staker's capacity to validate blocks depends on how many coins they have put up for stake and how long they have been validating transactions overall. The more coins they own and stake, the more power they have for a chance to produce new blocks. The block producer chosen for each transaction is chosen randomly through a weighted algorithm that takes the staker's relative power into account. And the source for this you can find at the bottom. So, why was proof of stake invented after proof of work? We all know proof of work is most famously the consensus mechanism used in Bitcoin. But why did this new model, proof of stake, come after that if Bitcoin's so popular? Well, proof of stake was developed as an alternative to proof of work because of concerns about how much energy proof of work uses, its environmental impact, its vulnerability to potential attacks, and the questions around its scalability potential. Proof of work blockchain models verify transactions through a consensus algorithm that requires miners to solve a cryptographic equation by trial and error. As we mentioned before, this requires expensive computers and uses a significant amount of energy. Those that verify the transaction first receive compensation in the form of coins, i.e., block rewards. We all know proof of stake now is a consensus algorithm that requires stakers to stake all or a portion of their coins to validate transactions. And we all know that they're chosen randomly, but those in a proof of stake setting, those who have a larger stake or have been staking longer have an advantage to be chosen randomly to verify a block. The stakers chosen must all agree to verify transactions. After they have verified a block, it is added to the chain and they receive a fee in the form of cryptocurrencies. If they don't verify it properly, their own stake will be affected and they will lose some or all of their coins. The main upside of proof of work is that it is trusted and has a long track record, while the main upside of proof of stake is that it requires less energy, can be more secure, and is scalable much easier. Investors may be familiar with proof of work protocols and have invested considerably in proof of work mining operations, but likely will appreciate the reduced mining cost of proof of stake. So here is an illustration depicting the differences between both consensus models. We have proof of work on the left. Mining capacity depends on computational power, and by default, access to energy. Miners receive block rewards to solve a cryptographic puzzle, and hackers would need to have a computer powerful than 51% of the total network's hash rate to add a malicious block and cause a 51% attack. In proof of stake, as we mentioned, validating capacity depends on the stake in the network. Validators do not receive a block reward. Instead, they technically collect transaction fees as rewards. And hackers would need to own 51% of all the cryptocurrency on that blockchain network in a proof of stake setting, which is practically impossible and therefore making 51% attacks nearly impossible, virtually impossible. You can find the credit for the graph below. So we've talked a bit about the potential downsides of proof of work blockchains. We can think of cryptocurrency mining as the process of turning electricity into a financial asset in the form of block rewards. However, because non-renewable energy is less expensive than renewable energy, that's arguable, depending on where you live and your accessibility to energy infrastructure. Miners are incentivized to use the former to maximize profits. To alter this dynamic, excess renewable energy could be routed to cryptocurrency mining instead of being sold back to the grid or stored when those options are cost ineffective. Proof of work prevents attacks by making miners expend resources to compete against each other to move quickly to more quickly solve cryptographic equations to confirm each blockchain block. It relies on miners to act in good faith and follow consensus rules. As we mentioned before, a big significant threat in proof of work networks is the possibility of a 51% attack. That's when a group gains control of over 50% of mining power and can then prevent transactions from being confirmed on the blockchain. They can even spend coins twice and create forks in the blockchain, making alternative versions of the blockchain seem valid. Although estimates as to the makeup of the energy utilized in Bitcoin mining, for example, are difficult to accurately quantify, it has been reported that up to 73% of Bitcoin's energy consumption is carbon neutral. This has been driven by reliance on hydropower in mining centers, including Southwest China and Scandinavia. In other words, this model could provide a way to mine proof of work cryptocurrencies with clean energy, cut emissions, and convert excess renewable supply into an asset with value. Although in its infancy, this concept may help Bitcoin overcome the ecological headwinds it faces as the world continues to adopt renewable energy and other sustainable technologies. This is from Gemini's Cryptopedia. So the source of this illustration is from Cambridge Bitcoin Electricity Consumption Index. Here you can see, I believe that's terawatt hash per year. You can see it across multiple individual countries and ranking essentially a nation's annual electricity consumption overall for everything. China being the most, followed by USA, India, Russia, Japan, Brazil, blah, 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 blah. And we can see at the very end, between Chile and Bangladesh, Bitcoin is on there in of itself, on its own. So if we look at this entire graph, you can easily argue that, okay, the amount of energy that Bitcoin really consumes at this point in time in 2023 is relatively I don't want to say negligible, but in the grand scheme of things, negligible compared to all the electricity used around the world between individual countries and also collectively as a human race. And you can also argue that the value that Bitcoin provides is a necessary sacrifice to create a digital commodity that is as hard and unhackable as it's proven to be for the world to use. So Give me a moment. Consensus mechanisms are an integral part of blockchain networks, ensuring decentralizations of the parties in charge of validating transactions. To achieve a blockchain's paradigm characteristics of being immutable, trustless, and distributed, a reliable consensus mechanism is required. Here is the key thing. It's not really about proof of work versus proof of stake. It is about this question alone. The reality is, and it isn't a question, actually, the reality is this type of consensus mechanism that is most suitable for any one blockchain or project depends on the needs of a network. What are you trying to do? That should determine why you pick proof of work or proof of stake. For instance, proof of work is usually said to be the most suitable for fraud prevention, security, and trust building in a network. For the most part, in practice, even if there are exceptions in theory, miners cannot can't even talk right now. It's very late at night. Miners cannot be misled about transaction because of the protection provided by proof of work, which secures a crypto asset's transaction history while also increasing the difficulty of changing data over time. That's really important to know. Similarly, network performance and scalability are commonly said to be two key upsides of using a proof of stake based consensus mechanism. Proof of stake is often utilized when high transaction speed is required for on chain transactions per second, or TPS, and actual network transfer settlement. Moreover, validators of the blockchain in a PoS setting could be penalized for mistakes or fraud, which financially incentivizes them to keep the chain secure and by default keeps them honest. However, some critics worry that proof of stake can make it relatively easy for people to concentrate power in a field whose adherents praise decentralization as a core value. The more proof of stake cryptocurrency you own, the more power you can wield over the system. So one is energy intensive, and the other one's capital intensive. They're not necessarily the same thing because the financial game theory regarding proof of work and the hardware and the energy involved in it is an adjustable variable depending on your cost for the energy and your cost for the infrastructure and how long you're going to mine to pay off the mining itself and the energy and see kind of a longer term financial upside depending on what cryptocurrency you mine. That's why you see a lot of big Bitcoin mining operations around the world. Usually they're seeking to buy application specific integrated circuits or ASIC miners in mass and bulk, and trying to centralize a mining farm in an area where they have access to very cheap electricity, whether that be through renewable sources or non-renewable means. So again, the source is at the bottom if you want to read that article in its complete form from crypto.com. So in conclusion, here are my final key takeaways from my point of view, from my opinion. These are from the sources, completely me. So for my personal notes, here's what I take away from all of this. When we're talking about proof of work or proof of stake, it comes down to this for me. What questions are we attempting to answer when speaking about digital assets? I think the best questions are the following. How do we create and store value securely using encrypted software? How do we communally agree upon an alternative set of fairer rules versus traditional entities that issue currencies in our lives? How do we ensure the long-term security, fairness, and evolution of digital assets? And finally, how do we define such a broad concept like decentralization within the greater scope of the crypto industry? So for me, a good rule of thumb when defining and considering the word decentralization is number one, the accessibility to infrastructure or general participation on the chain, in the chain. Number two, the degree of encouragement for the widespread distribution of a chain's tokenized native assets and the form of its initial distribution. Number three, how is governance achieved and performed amongst participants of that chain in regard to the direction of that chain's future? And number four, finally, the overall protocol design. How is it going to encourage more power away from the core team of developers or initial key players exponentially over time? To the degree that a cryptocurrency's blockchain can answer the following, the aforementioned points, to the effective degree they can accomplish these things, that to me is the real principle and measured value of decentralization. That's how you can measure a chain's decentralization, with all of those questions answered in an appropriate fashion. So we come to the end. What is the best way after all of this to achieve consensus on the blockchain? Is it through energy exertion or simply capital intensity? Is it proof of work or proof of stake? Like we mentioned before, well, it depends. There is no one size fits all for protocol and consensus designs. So really, proof of work is best when you're generally trying to give life to hard money cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin or Ergo. Proof of work systems focus more on value creation and business-driven game theory within a decentralized arena. It by default has scarcity baked into the equation, which is a sort of deferred reward for early miners and their businesses if the network is maintained secure and decentralized. Although scalability, however, is not typically the top priority when compared to value creation, decentralization, and security. So, due to proof of work's many complexities and considerations, labor and cheap energy allow for more diversification of actors across the world and encourages a wider pool of miners to participate based on geographic advantages and unique accessibility. What does that sound like? That sounds like gold. That sounds like oil. It sounds like most of the commodities around in the world, people are given a preset amount of resources underneath the ground, and some countries fare better than others, but that's kind of the nature of human existence. There's going to be some with a better advantage in some industries or in some sectors of society, and there will be some without that same advantage. Proof of work is more time tested successfully, proving its utility in the advent of a decentralized digital commodity or asset such as Bitcoin. With the beginning of Bitcoin, the argument against proof of work is not about its success rate at bootstrapping fairer creations of value storage than traditional currencies and assets. The argument against proof of work is over the process of that creation and if exponential energy expenditure is worth its weight in energy usage. The cost on the environment, the cost on building up all of this infrastructure around something that's ultimately intangible. It's an intangible digital coin. Is that worth it? That is the argument that people have against proof of work. And finally, proof of work generally has more widely understood attack factors and rigorous research behind it than proof of stake, because proof of stake is newer. So, where does proof of stake shine? Proof of stake is generally best for flexibility, ease of onboarding users to participate in the consensus layer, and oftentimes the capabilities of its smart contract functionality. Proof of stake chains can choose to validate a block quicker with less variances than traditional proof of work chains. The network efficiency of PoS makes scalability easier to achieve than PoW. As a result, PoS generally allows newer chains to fast track their way to onboarding a broader global audience quicker than most proof of work chains that can appeal to a more niche group of active participants interested in mining. Proof of stake is more efficient at achieving similar outcomes to proof of work when mimicked properly. Proof of stake eliminates many overhead variables that may allow interested actors with deeper pockets to have a bigger say over governance and disproportionate staking rewards. Proof of stake is harder to make decentralized due to the backtracking it needs to do to ensure governance mechanisms and token distribution are retroactively made fairer for onboarding future users with disproportionately less buying power for coins. This is common when, you know, there are a future influx of users that obviously were not present at the initial coin offering of the blockchain in a proof of stake model or auction. So proof of stake eliminates the need for hardware and traditional mining upkeep. Smart contracts are more widespread in proof of stake as normal features. Utility is heavily encouraged on proof of stake chains. Scalability is generally easier to achieve and encouraged over decentralization as a result. A proper PoS system inherently locks in value and governance voting power for users automatically through the staking of tokens. So, in conclusion, the important takeaways here, apart from everything I just said, it's if you take nothing else away from this presentation, just remember this. The difference between the two and the relevancy between the two is based on which use cases are you seeking to bring to market, which trade-offs are you willing to make, because there's a trade-off no matter what you do. No one blockchain consensus layer is perfect. There's going to be trade-offs you have to make. And this is, you know, characterized by that famous blockchain trilemma, where you can have a triangle between one point being decentralization, one scalability, and the other security. And out of this triangle and these 3 points, you are only allowed to have 2 out of the 3. You either are going to have decentralization and scalability, but you sacrifice security, or you have scalability and security, but you don't have decentralization. That type of thing. It's like a rock, paper, scissors shoot. You know, there's a losing variable if you choose 2 out of the 3. And finally, it's important to highlight how many layer 1 blockchains do we actually need? We have tens of thousands of crypto assets, and we have hundreds, if not thousands, of blockchain platforms. How many of those do we actually need? It's kind of like the question of how many grocery stores do we need, or how many gas station companies do we need? Pretty much anything. How many computer models do we need? How many brands do we need? How many do we interact with for sneakers in our lifetime? You know, it's usually a dozen or 2 dozen at most. And maybe that's probably where the future of cryptocurrencies have to go, where we all come together on a handful of them that become extremely relevant, and then we have kind of these distant blockchains that aren't part of the everyday usage for customers and users. And finally, to answer that question, no one individual can do. We have to embrace free market competition and let the users decide. Education is key. And finally, we have a graph here that illustrates how common crypto is. This is from a share of respondents in selected countries who said that they used or owned cryptocurrencies before in 2020. And as we can see, the majority of the countries that have begun to expose themselves to cryptocurrencies are largely in the developing world, followed by more industrialized world countries such as Switzerland, uh, China, US, Germany, Japan. The source is Statista Global Consumer Survey. All right. Thank you for watching. I hope some of this was useful to all of you. You can follow me on Twitter at Sigma Prism. I apologize for being a little slow tonight. It's been a long day. I'm very tired, and it is 10 p.m. So without further ado, thank you for watching again. If you enjoyed this content, if you found this educational, this presentation, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe. It really means a lot in the early days of this channel if you guys share the video, if you subscribe, if you recommend it to a friend or family member. Thank you so much. And remember, you could always listen to these presentations on YouTube with accelerated speed. You know, you can listen at 1.5x speed or 1.2 or whatever. If I sound like I'm going too slow. So thank you so much again, and I'll see you in the next one.